Marion
You're on.
back.
Major problem.
Nothing.
Sneak that one in on me. I didn't know it was there.
I moved it over there so it's easier for you to get to. Hey, little girl.
I'm taking her home with me. You can't keep her.
She's all right.
Oh,
Give you
you're
a
on.
little break.
Good evening.
Mm.
Welcome to Salt Lake Baptist College. We're going to resume our study in Jeremiah. And we left off a little bit early. Last week we left off at the end of chapter 25. We're going to just pick up at chapter 26 right there and charge on through and hope that we make it all the way to the end of chapter 45. I hope you've read most of that. They're short chapters. And if you haven't, you didn't miss an awful lot, because a lot of it is things that he's gone over a second time with just a few different people. Okay, but Jeremiah, our weeping prophet, was upset because God told him about all this captivity that was going to take place. God's unhappy with the Israelites right now, or with what we would call them, the children of Israel, the Hebrews. He's unhappy with them, extremely unhappy with them. Okay? And he's explaining, Jeremiah is explaining to him, as God tells him, what's going to happen to these people. And he's telling people ahead of time, there's a way that you can do this easily. God will still punish you, but you can do this much easier if you will surrender yourselves to these Chaldeans, these Babylonians. When they come in here, just surrender yourselves to them and go along with the program. But guess what? Typical human beings, they says, nah, we're going to have a fight. So they decided to have a big bloody battle. And he is in the middle of explaining here what's going to happen in these battles. Jeremiah in chapter 26 is on trial. And he's preaching to the princes, people, the princes of Judah now. In Jeremiah 26, verse 2, he says, Thus saith the Lord, stand in the court of the Lord's house, and speak unto all the cities of Judah, which come to worship in the Lord's house, all the words that I command thee to speak unto them, diminish not a word. God says, you tell them everything, word for word. And we go to verse 7, he says, So the priests and the prophets and all the people heard Jeremiah speaking these words in the house of the Lord. And verse 8, Now it came to pass when Jeremiah had made an end to speaking all that the Lord had commanded him to speak unto all the people, that the priests and prophets and all the people took him, saying, Thou shalt surely die. They weren't happy with him. Jeremiah 26, verse 12, he says, Then spake Jeremiah unto all the princes and to all the people, saying, The Lord sent me to prophesy against this house and against this city all the words that ye have heard. Verse 15, he says, But know ye for certain that if you put me to death, ye shall surely bring innocent blood upon yourselves, and upon this city, and upon the inhabitants thereof. For a truth the Lord hath sent me unto you to speak all these words in your ears. Verse 16, he says, Then said the princes and all the people unto the priests and to the prophets, This man is not worthy to die, for he hath spoken to us in the name of the Lord our God. Someone recognized that he was speaking in God's name, and he was speaking the truth. Go up to verse number 23, he says, And they fetched forth Urijah out of Egypt, and brought him unto Jehoiakim the king, who slew him with the sword, and cast his dead body into the graves of the common people. Nevertheless, the hand of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, was with Jeremiah, that should not give him unto the hand of the people to put him to death. Now, John Darby is a commentator, and this commentary is available in eSword if you care to go in and look it up. But in chapter 26 begins this series of details with a prophecy of the commencement of Jehoiakim's reign. The people are warned as being ready already in sin, that if they repent, they shall escape. We have constantly seen this character attached to the prophecies of Jeremiah, as though God said, "Today, if you will hear my voice." Circumstances rendered this appeal urgent, for in fact, if Israel did not repent, the house of Jehovah was to be like Shiloh. We find that of which God had warned the prophet. They strive against him, but as Jehovah had promised, they gain no advantage over him. We see that it is the ecclesiastical party that excites the people against the testimony which God bears to them by the mouth of the prophet. But God turns the heart of the princes and the people towards him. There were some also who regarded the ways of Jehovah. Their intelligence did not go far, but sufficiently so for deliverance. They feared God. We may remark here that conscience laid hold of the word of God in its immediate application. No doubt the devil or the evil would go on increasing, and when ripe, the judgment would be accomplished. For God does not strike before iniquity has come to its height, and then the prophecy would be fulfilled. But conscience, under the influence of the word, takes knowledge of principles which are judged by it, even when all is not yet ripe for judgment, and as yet, consequently, the judgment is not executed. Okay, and in that he covered verses 18 and 19 of Jeremiah 26. Chapter 27, in verse 1, he says, "In the beginning of the reign of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, came this word unto Jeremiah from the Lord, saying," and we jump up to verse number 8, and he says, "And it shall come to pass that the nation and kingdom which will not serve the same Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, and that will not put their neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon, that nation will I punish, saith the Lord, with the sword, and with the famine, and with the pestilence, until I have consumed them by his hand." He says, "I'm going to bring them in and I'm going to thrash you. And I'm going to use Babylon to do it." That's what God's telling his people. Tell me he wasn't mad? He was. They didn't believe him. When I say mad, he was angry. I'm not sure that he was mad in English connotation yet. It said in chapter 11, or excuse me, verse 11, Jeremiah 27:11, "But the nations that bring their neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon and serve him, those will I let remain still in their own land, saith the Lord, and they shall till it and dwell therein." Oh, it sounds like he's making a provision for them. How horrible is that punishment? All right.
Saying, if you do what I say, I'll make it okay.
Yeah, that's what God's doing. He's saying here, it's all you got to do is
Submit.
Yeah. You go to verse 12, he says, "I spoke to Zedekiah, king of Judah, according to all these words, saying, Bring your necks under the yoke of the king of Babylon, and serve him and his people, and live." Verse 16, he says, "Also I spake to the priests and all this people, saying, Thus saith the Lord, Hearken not to the words of your prophets that prophesy unto you, saying, Behold, the vessels of the Lord's house shall now shortly be brought again from Babylon, for they prophesy a lie unto you." And verse 22, it says, "They shall be carried to Babylon, and there shall they be until the day that I visit them, saith the Lord, and I will bring them up and restore them to this place." Okay? No matter what the prophets were telling them, God says, here's what the truth is. Now, Matthew Henry gave us some comments here that was good. It says, "Jeremiah humbly addresses the king of Judah to persuade him to surrender to the king of Babylon. His act would be, his act would be the people's and would determine them, and therefore he speaks to him as to them all. Bring your necks under the yoke of the king of Babylon and live. It is their wisdom to submit to the heavy iron yoke of a cruel tyrant, that they may secure the lives of their bodies. And is it not much more our wisdom to submit to the sweet and easy yoke of our rightful Lord and Master, Jesus Christ, that we may secure the lives of our souls? Bring down your spirits to repentance and faith, and that is the way to bring up your spirits to heaven and glory. And with much more cogency and compassion may we expostulate with perishing souls, then Jeremiah here expostulates with a perishing people. Why will you die by the sword and the famine? Miserable deaths, which you inevitably run yourselves upon under pretense of avoiding miserable lives. What God had spoken in general of all those that were the king of Babylon, he would have them to apply to themselves and be afraid of. It were well if sinners would, in like manner, be afraid of the destruction threatened against all those that will not have Christ to reign over them, and reason thus with themselves, why should we die the second death, which is 1,000 times worse than that by sword and famine, when we might submit and live? He says, why should we be willing to go to hell when we can go to heaven? That's what he's saying. Makes good sense, doesn't it? Chapter 28. And I gave this a goofy title. I called this chapter Hananiah the Liar. It's talking about Hananiah, okay, who told a lie. And Jeremiah 28 verse 1, he says, it came to pass the same year in the beginning of the reign of Zedekiah king of Judah in the 4th year in the 5th month, that Hananiah the son of Azar the prophet, which was of Gibeon, spoke unto me in the house of the Lord in the presence of all the priests and all the people, saying, thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, saying, I have broken the yoke of the king of Babylon. Wait a minute. This idiot is saying he broke the yoke of the king of Babylon? He didn't even know how strong the king of Babylon was, did he? But he's saying he did it. So here we go up to verse number 10. He says, then Hananiah the prophet took the yoke from off the prophet Jeremiah's neck and brake it. And verse 15, then said the prophet Jeremiah unto Hananiah the prophet, hear now, Hananiah, the Lord hath not sent thee, but thou makest this people to trust in a lie. Verse 16, therefore thus saith the Lord, behold, I will cast thee from off the face of the earth. This year thou shalt die, because thou hast taught rebellion against the Lord. So Hananiah the prophet died the same year in the 7th month. Yes, sir.
So this, and it's somewhere in this chapter or before this chapter, I was reading that said, if the prophet says what's true is true, if it comes to full, he's telling the truth. If it doesn't come to full, he's lying. But he said that he would die, and he actually died, so he was telling the truth, not the other guy.
God took him out.
Yeah.
Okay. So Matthew Henry's comment here is the false prophets thought to ingratiate themselves with the people by promising them peace. Now the prophet shows that he bore them as great a goodwill as their prophets did, whom they were so fond of, and though he had no warrant from God to promise them peace, yet he earnestly desired it and prayed for it. How strangely were those besotted who caressed those who did them the greatest wrong imaginable by flattering them, and persecuted him who did them the greatest service imaginable by interceding for them. And it says he appeals to the event to prove it false. Jeremiah 28, 7 through 9. Says the false prophets reflected upon Jeremiah as Ahab upon Micaiah, because he never prophesied good concerning them, but evil. Now he pleads that this had been the purport of the prophecies that other prophets had delivered, so that it ought not be looked upon as a strange thing, or as rendering his mission doubtful. For prophets of old prophesied against many countries and great kingdoms. So bold were they in delivering the messages which God sent by them, and so far from fearing men or seeking to please them as Hananiah did. They made no difficulty, any more than Jeremiah did, of threatening war, famine, and pestilence, and what they said was regarded as coming from God. Why then should Jeremiah be run down as a pestilent fellow and a sower of sedition, when he preached no otherwise than God's prophets had always done before him? Other prophets had foretold destruction, did not come, which yet did not disprove their divine mission, as in the case of Jonah. For God is gracious and ready to turn away his wrath from those that turn away from their sins. But the prophet that prophesied of peace and prosperity, especially as Hananiah did, absolutely and unconditionally, without adding that necessary proviso, that they do not by willful sin put a bar in their own door and stop the current of God's favors, will be proved a true prophet only by the accomplishment of his prediction. What you're just saying. If it come to pass, then it shall be known that the Lord has sent him, but if not, he will appear to be a cheat and an impostor. That what you're referring to?
Yeah, that one little thing stuck in my mind when I read that verse.
Yeah.
When I read that verse, that what you just said,
Came,
I was like, oh, I just read that. It actually said that.
Yeah, it's right
It
there.
came true. So I guess you know who the true prophet was.
So
That's the only reason I brought it up, because I remembered it in my mind.
in chapter 29, Jeremiah admonishes the captives to be peaceable and settle in. Jeremiah 29:1, he says, Now these are the words of the letter that Jeremiah the prophet sent from Jerusalem unto the residue of the elders, which were carried away captives, and to the priests, and to the prophets, and to all the people whom Nebuchadnezzar had carried away captives from Jerusalem to Babylon. You got to understand that some of this prophecy is not told in the order that it occurred. And we're seeing something that was sent after people were already taken into captivity, okay? But yet a lot of this is still predicting captivity, okay? In verse 2, it says, After that Jeconiah the king and queen and the eunuchs, the princes of Judah and Jerusalem, and the carpenters and the smiths were departed from Jerusalem. So, a quote from Halley's Bible Handbook, it says, Written after Jehoiakim and the best of the people had been taken to Babylon, advising them to be peaceful and obedient captives and promising return after 70 years to their homeland. And Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 10, he says, For thus saith the Lord, that after 70 years be accomplished in Babylon, at Babylon, I will visit you and perform my good word toward you in causing you to return to this place. But even in Babylon, the false prophets kept up their fight against Jeremiah. In verse 21, it says, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, of Ahab, the son of Koliah, and of Zedekiah, the son of Maaseiah, which prophesy a lie unto you in my name. Behold, I will deliver them into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, he called it here, king of Babylon, and he shall slay them before your eyes. You will see Nebuchadrezzar and Nebuchadnezzar. They're both the same one. It just had to do with the people who interpreted those names back in the translation days. Okay, it's the same person. I didn't discover this until Pastor Mullins was preaching something, I can't remember, a lot of years ago, when he was our pastor in the church over at Heritage, and came along, and this Nebuchadrezzar popped up, and it never rung true to me that there was a different word for Nebuchadnezzar.
In translation, you run into that a lot.
So I went and I had a visit with him. He's the one that explained to me what was going on there between those two names. And really, it's the same name for the same, or for the person that most of us more popularly know as Nebuchadnezzar. Just they put an R instead of an N. Okay. Jeremiah 29, verse number 32 says, Therefore, thus saith the Lord, Behold, I will punish Shemaiah the Nehelamite and his seed. He shall not have a man to dwell among this people, neither shall he behold the good that I will do for my people, saith the Lord, because he hath taught rebellion against the Lord. Another comment from Matthew Henry here, he says he directs them to seek the good of the country where they were captives, in Jeremiah 29, verse 7. To pray for it, to endeavor to promote it. This forbids them to attempt anything against the public peace while they were subjects to the king of Babylon. Though he was a heathen, an idolater, an oppressor, and an enemy to God and his church, yet while he gave them protection, they must pay him allegiance and live quiet and peaceable lives under him in all godliness and honesty, not plotting to shake off his yoke, but patiently leaving it to God in due time to work deliverance for them. Nay, they must pray to God for the peace of the places where they were, that they might oblige them to continue their kindness to them and disprove the character that had been given their nation. that they were hurtful to kings and provinces and moved sedition. Both the wisdom of the serpent and the innocency of the dove required them to be true to the government they lived under. Pardon me. For in the peace thereof you shall have peace. Should the country be embroiled in war, they would have the greatest share in the calamitous effects of it. Thus the primitive Christians, according to the temper of their holy religion, prayed for the powers that were, though they were persecuting powers. And if they were to pray for and seek the peace of the land of their captivity, much more reason have we to pray for the welfare of the land of our nativity, for we are a free people under a good government, that in the peace thereof we and ours may have peace. Every passenger is concerned in the safety of the ship. Okay? If you're all, in other words, if you're all in the same boat, that makes sense. You're all going to try to work together to keep the peace in that boat, aren't you? And to keep that boat moving forward safely. This is what he's trying to tell these people. It says, you're all together in this thing. I want you to behave while you're there. That'll make it easier for me to deliver you from that place when the time comes. When we get to chapter 30, Jeremiah 30, verse 1, he says, the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, Thus speaketh the Lord God of Israel, saying, Write thee all the words that I have spoken unto thee in a book. Now this is the first that we hear about him being commanded to write it in the book, isn't it? 30 chapters in here. But he's already been writing it in the book. Okay. Thus speaketh the Lord God of Israel, saying, Write thee all the words that I have spoken to thee unto the book. And verse 3 says, For lo, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will bring again the captivity of my people Israel and Judah, saith the Lord, and I will cause them to return to the land that I gave to their fathers, and they shall possess it. And verse number 8, it says, For it shall come to pass that day, saith the Lord of hosts, that I will break his yoke from off thy neck, and will burst thy bonds, and strangers shall no more serve themselves of him. And verse 21, And their nobles shall be of themselves, and their governors shall proceed from the midst of them, and I will cause them to draw near. Now he's talking about the children of Israel again, okay? And he shall approach unto me, for who is this that engaged his heart to approach unto thee, saith the Lord. Verse 22, And ye shall be my people, and I will be your God. You notice that promise keeps popping up? He said, I'm going to punish you people, but you're still mine. It's like when she takes her little girl and has to punish her. Yeah, she has to punish her, but she's going to keep her. She still loves her. She's still part of her. She's still part of her family.
Discipline.
That's discipline. And that's what God is teaching these people. It says, you still belong to me, but I'm going to punish you.
Be good.
Darby makes this comment on chapter 30. He says, God commands Jeremiah to write in a book all the words of the judgment which he had heard, for God would restore the people. Now this deliverance found to Israel at the height of the distress. This is the first thing presented to the prophet. No day could be compared to this day of Jacob's trouble. It is the day spoken of in Matthew 24 and Mark 13. But in this extremity, God comes to the help of his people who shall be delivered. And now God, having executed his judgment and acted according to his own counsels in grace, this deliverance shall in consequence be full and complete. Israel shall serve Jehovah their God and David their king. The ruin, Jeremiah 30 verse 12, was complete, incurable. Okay? No remedy could heal it. It is God who had smitten his people for the multitude of their sins. Nevertheless, he was with them to save them, and consequently all the nations who had availed themselves of God's anger to devour Israel should be themselves devoured. Zion should be rebuilt on her own foundation. Joy and peace should be her dwellings. The governors of the people should be her children. Israel should be the people of Jehovah, and Jehovah should be their God. Finally, a principle which we have seen clearly explained is here announced, namely that judgment should fall upon the wicked, that this judgment went forth to smite the people of God first because they were wicked and must bear the consequence. But wherever the wicked might be, this judgment would reach them. Wheresoever the carcass might be, there should the eagles be gathered together. And that was the end of last week's lesson. So, see, we're gonna have to rush. So, this next set of chapters has been reduced. I haven't used as much commentary in here so that we can get through this section. This tends to be a little bit dry, but we started for this week's. I went to we've been studying the Thompson Chain Reference notes in the Thompson Chain Reference Bible each week as pertained to the chapters we've read. Okay, and I'll read these to you. It's only a couple short paragraphs is all that's left of it here, and for next week the only thing that'll be left will be coming from Lamentations. Actually, this is all that's left of Jeremiah's notes from the Thompson Bible. Okay, it's just a set of notes in the back of the Bible. Okay, he talks about the persecution of Jeremiah's life in a miry dungeon in chapter 38, verse 6. We haven't gotten there yet. We'll be there today. And when he is carried into Egypt. Okay, Jeremiah didn't want to go to Egypt, but he ended up getting carried off into Egypt. Okay. The synopsis of the book section, they were at article number 5. He says, promises the restoration of the Jews, which we just read some of that in verse 30, and we'll read some more up to verse 33, and then prophecies occasioned by the sins of Jehoiakim and Zedekiah, and those are covered in chapters 34 through 39, so you can kind of see what's coming up here very shortly. The wretched condition of the remnant left in Judah and prophecies uttered to them, chapters 40 through 44, and the consolation to Baruch in chapter 45. 45 is very short, but 6 or 7 verses, and it's just dedicated to his scribe, Baruch. Okay, and high spots in the message. He speaks of the new covenant, chapter 31 through 34, where we're just about to go now. And then he speaks about the mutilation of God's word in chapters 36, verses 21 through 24. And then there was a little section about all the people that he'd been rejected by. And this last one, he was rejected by the king. When we get to chapter 36, we're going to find out that Jeremiah even was rejected by the king, who had been his friend up to this point. Because of time restraints, we'll use brief summations for this week's chapter. In chapter 30, Halley describes for both Israel and Judah with messianic foregleams commanded of God to be written so that it could be kept to compare with the events of after ages. In other words, remember in chapter 30, what did he tell Jeremiah? He says, write it in a book, didn't he? Well, you write something in a book. Now this little thing, for you folks at home, this isn't a book, is it? It's a binder, okay? But it's not a book. See, if I want to take the pages out of here, I can just click it and pull the pages out. But when you write something in a book, you got a book here. Things are bound in here. They're sewn down to a ribbon. And they're written down in there, and they stay in there, don't they? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can't just click something in the middle and take them out. Can't be done. Okay? That's a book. There's a difference between a binder and a book, I guess. But he's telling Jeremiah to write it down in a book, so you understand he's writing it down in something that's permanent. Okay? Now, probably in those days, his book was a scroll. Okay? It had a couple of wooden knobs, one on each end with a little stick in between so they could roll it up, but that was the book. It wasn't loose leaf like this where you could take, I can go back here a couple chapters and pull out so many pages. It wasn't like that. So God says, we're going to do this up permanently. All right? So in Jeremiah 30, verse 3 said, for lo, the days come, saith the Lord, I will bring again the captivity of my people and Judah, saith the Lord, and I will cause them to return to the land that I gave to their fathers, and they shall possess it. He says, I'm going to bring you back. And In verse 13, he says, there is none to plead thy cause, that thou mayest be bound up. Thou hast no healing medicines. Verse 22, he says, and you shall be my people, and I will be your God. Okay, and we read this to you a little earlier. Chapter 31, Alice gives a description of this song of restoration. It says the New Covenant, chapter 31, verses 31 through 34 of the Old Testament, is the story of God's dealings with the Hebrew nation on the basis of the covenant given on Mount Sinai. Here's a definite prediction that the Mosaic covenant would be superseded by another covenant. Now we're starting to get into messianic things, aren't we? Things to do with Jesus. Something to do with a different covenant. Remember that, what was the other covenant called? The covenant of Sinai? The covenant given on Mount Sinai? Okay. We're about to hear about a new covenant. Here is a definite prediction that the Mosaic covenant would be superseded by another covenant. Displacement of the Mosaic covenant by the Christian covenant is the main thesis of the epistle to the Hebrews. Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 34, he says, again, I will build thee, and thou shalt be built, O virgin of Israel. Thou shalt again be adorned with thy tabrets, and shall go forth in the dances of them that make merry. Verse 10, hear the word of the Lord, O ye nations, and declare it to the isles far off, and say that he that scattered Israel will gather him, and keep him as a shepherd doth his flock. Verse 31 says, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. Verse 32, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they break, although I was an husband unto them, saith the Lord. Verse 33, but this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, saith the Lord, I will put my law in their inward parts, and write it in their hearts, and will be their God, and they shall be my people. So in chapter 32, Jeremiah buys a field. And a short comment from Halley's again. He says, this was the year before Jerusalem fell. The burning of the city and desolation of Judah was almost at hand. Amid the gloom and despair of the hour, Jeremiah was commanded of God to buy a field in a public ceremony and put away the deed for safekeeping to emphasize his prediction that the captives would return and the land would again be cultivated. He says, Robert, go over here and buy a piece of property. And I'm going to take you and send you to Colorado for the next 70 years, okay? But I want you to buy that piece of property and get it recorded proper in all the legal books. And get it put away in a safe place. Because when you come back, you're going to be able to pull that out and claim it again. This is what he's telling them, okay? That's just kind of a quick synopsis. But Jeremiah 32, verse 1, it says, the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord in the 10th year of Zedekiah, king of Judah, which was the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar. For then the king of Babylon's army besieged Jerusalem, and Jeremiah the prophet was shut up in the court of the prison, which was in the king of Judah's house. For Zedekiah, king of Judah, had shut him up, saying, wherefore dost thou prophesy and say, thus saith the Lord, behold, I will give this city into the hand of the king of Babylon, and he shall take it. In verse 9, it says, and I bought a field of Hanameel, my uncle's son, that was in Anathoth, and weighed him the money, even 17 shekels of silver. Now you got to understand, Jeremiah's in jail while he's doing this transaction. But it's a relative, and he's able to communicate with him and buy this field. And he said, and I gave the evidence of the purchase unto Baruch the son of Neriah, the son of Maaseiah, in the sight of Hanameel, mine uncle's son, and in the presence of the witnesses that subscribed the book of the purchase before all the Jews that sat in the court of the prison. Now he's doing exactly what God told him to do, isn't he? He's buying the property, he's getting it registered, taken care of. Verse 14, he says, thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, take these evidences, this evidence of the purchase, both which is sealed and this evidence which is open, put them in an earthen vessel, that they may continue many days. For thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, houses and fields and vineyards shall be possessed again in this land. In other words, in the future. All right? Jump up to verse 44. It says, men shall buy fields for money and subscribe evidences and seal them and take witnesses in the land of Benjamin and in the places about Jerusalem, in the cities of Judah, and in the cities of the mountains, and in the cities of the valley, and in the cities of the south, for I will cause their captivity to return, saith the Lord. In chapter 33, short comment from Halley's here. He says, the branch. You remember hearing about this David Koresh and his branch Davidians?
Yeah.
This is where he got that branch, right here. Okay. It says, of the 20 Davidic kings who reigned over Judah during the 400 years between David and the captivity, most of them were very bad. Only a few were worthy of the name of David. In chapters 22 and 23, Jeremiah bitterly indicted this family line of kings to whom God had given the promise of an eternal throne. Here in chapter 33, he repeats with fuller explanation the prophecy of one great king called the branch, in whom the promise would be fulfilled. Who's he talking about? Huh?
Jeremiah, I was going to say. He
Talking
said
about Jesus.
Dennis was right.
Yeah.
That's right. I know one.
Jeremiah never was a king. It says, prophecy of one great king called the branch, in whom the promise would be fulfilled. Okay? Jeremiah 33, up to verse number 3 here, he says, call unto me, and I will answer thee, and show thee great and mighty things which thou knowest not. Have you ever heard that before? If you haven't, haven't been sitting in church. Because I've heard it in this church here, and I've heard it in my church over there. Call unto me, and I will answer thee. Call unto me, and I will answer thee. Call unto me, and I shall answer thee, and show thee great and mighty things which thou knowest not. Yeah. Tell me there aren't any songs in the Bible. Okay. Verse 4, it says, for thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, concerning the houses of this city, and concerning the houses of the kings of Judah, which are thrown down by the mounts and by the sword. Verse 7, and I will cause the captivity of Judah and the captivity of Israel to return, and will build them as at the first. Verse 15, in those days and at that time will I cause the branch of righteousness to grow up unto David, and he shall execute judgment and righteousness in the land. And here's a comment from Darby on chapter 34. It says, on the occasion of renewed iniquity, the prophet announces a certain ruin of the people. Nevertheless, Zedekiah, though carried captive to Babylon, should die there in peace. In the succeeding chapters, we have some details of the obstinate rebellion which led to the destruction of Jerusalem and all of Judah. And he added a note here. He says, God's ways in this are remarkable. He had broken the oath of Jehovah, and he is judged as profane. This is king. And it says it was mainly through the influence of others, for he was disposed to listen to Jeremiah, and therefore mercy is extended to him. This king, Zedekiah, was a friend to Jeremiah, wasn't he? He kept him in his house as a prison, rather than sending him to a dungeon somewhere. Okay. Jeremiah 34, at verse number 3, he says, and thou shalt not escape out of his hand, but shalt surely be taken and delivered into his hand. And thine eyes shall behold the eyes of the king of Babylon, and he shall speak with thee mouth to mouth, and thou shalt go to Babylon. Yet hear the word of the Lord, O Zedekiah, king of Judah. Thus saith the Lord of thee, thou shalt not die by the sword, but thou shalt die in peace, and with the burnings of thy fathers, the former kings which were before thee, so shall they burn odors for thee, and they will lament thee, saying, Ah, Lord, for I have pronounced the word, saith the Lord. Then Jeremiah the prophet spoke all these words unto Zedekiah, king of Judah, in Jerusalem. Verse 21, and Zedekiah, king of Judah, and his princes will I give into the hand of their enemies, and into the hand of them that seek their life, and into the hand of the king of Babylon's army, which are gone up from you. Go to chapter 35, he says, Jeremiah cites the obedience of the Rechabites And John Darby comments for us here, the obedience of the Rechabites is set forth in order to show out more clearly the sin of Judah, disobedient in spite of the remonstrances and the patience of God. God does not forget the obedience that glorifies his name. The family of the Rechabites shall never fail. This is a tribe of people who lived out around Jerusalem somewhere that were godly people. Can you imagine that? In Judah? In Jeremiah 35, verse 6, it says, "But they said, We will drink no wine, for Jonadab, the son of Rechab, our father, commanded us, saying, Ye shall drink no wine, neither ye nor your sons forever." And verse 7, "Neither shall ye build house, nor sow seed, nor plant vineyard, nor have any. But all your days ye shall dwell in tents, that ye may live many days in the land where ye be strangers." So basically, they're just itinerant shepherds, okay, living in tents. Verse 11, "But it came to pass when Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came into the land, that we said, Come and let us go to Jerusalem for fear of the army of the Chaldeans and for fear of the army of the Syrians. So we dwell at Jerusalem." In verse 18, "And Jeremiah said unto the house of the Rechabites, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, because ye have obeyed the commandment of Jonadab your father, and kept all his precepts, and done according unto all he hath commanded you, therefore thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, Jonadab the son of Rechab shall not want a man to stand before me forever." And we move on to chapter 36. Alice gives a short comment here on the mutilation of God's word. It says, "Jeremiah at this time had been prophesying for 23 years, from the 13th year of Josiah to the 4th year of Jehoiakim." If you're looking on your timeline, you might find those years there. "He is now commanded to gather these prophecies into a book." Remember where we said he was told to write it in a book? Okay. "So that they could be read to the people, for at the time Jeremiah himself was not free to speak to the people." Remember, he was in prison. Okay. It took a year or so to write the book. And it says, "The reading of the book made a profound impression on some of the princes, but the king brazenly and defiantly burned the book. Then Jeremiah wrote it all over again." And we'll go to the text. In Jeremiah 36, verse 2, he says, "Take thee a roll of a book, and write therein all the words I have spoken unto thee against Israel, and against Judah, and against all the nations, for the day I spake unto thee, for the days of Josiah, even unto this day." And we've read all those words up to now, haven't we? 36 chapters worth of them. Okay, so far. It says, "It may be that the house of Judah will hear all the evil which I purpose to do unto them, that they may return every man from his evil way, that I may forgive their iniquity and their sin." He's still giving them a chance. Verse 12, he says, "Then he went down into the king's house, into the scribe's chamber, and lo, all the princes sat there, even Elishama the scribe, and Delaiah the son of Shemaiah, and Elnathan the son of Achbor, and Gemariah the son of Shaphan, and Zedekiah the son of Hananiah, and all the princes." In verse 13, "Then Micaiah declared unto them all the words that he had heard when Baruch read the book in the ears of the people." Verse 27, "Then the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah after that the king had burned the roll, and the words which Baruch wrote at the mouth of Jeremiah, saying, Take thee again another roll, and write in it the former words that were in the first roll, which Jehoiakim the king of Judah hath burned." Verse 32, "Then took Jeremiah another roll, gave it to Baruch the scribe, the son of Neriah, who wrote thereon from the mouth of Jeremiah all the words of the book which Jehoiakim king of Judah had burned in the fire, and there were added besides unto them many like words." In chapter 37, Jeremiah is imprisoned. "And when he was in the gate of Benjamin, a captain of the ward was there, whose name was Irijah, the son of Shelemiah, the son of Hananiah, and he took Jeremiah the prophet, saying, Thou fallest away to the Chaldeans. And when Jeremiah was entered into the dungeon and into the cabins, and Jeremiah had remained there many days, then Zedekiah the king sent and took him out. And the king asked him secretly in his house, and said, Is there any word from the Lord? And Jeremiah said, There is. For said he, thou shalt be delivered into the hand of the king of Babylon. This is before, again, I told you this prophecies are not all listed in order. And, we saw where they're already taken Babylon. Now he's back before they went to get to Babylon. It's just another one of the things that came along. It says, and Zedekiah the king commanded that they should commit Jeremiah into the court of the prison, that they should give him daily a piece of bread out of the baker's street until all the bread in the city were spent. And thus Jeremiah remained in the court of the prison. So Zedekiah was making sure that Jeremiah was given pretty good care, really, for being in prison. But then we went to chapter 38, and it says, thus saith the Lord, he that remaineth in the city shall die by the sword, by the famine, and by the pestilence, but he that goeth forth to the Chaldeans shall live, for he shall have his life for a prey, and shall live. And thus saith the Lord, this city shall surely be given into the hand of the king of Babylon's army, which shall take it. Verse 6, then took they Jeremiah, and cast him into the dungeon of Malchiah, the son of Hamelech, that was in the court of the prison, and they let down Jeremiah with cords, and in the dungeon there was no water but mire. So Jeremiah sunk in the mire. In other words, a nasty mess in this pit that they put him into. Okay. Verse 13, so they drew Jeremiah with cords. He was eventually told to bring him back out. So they drew up Jeremiah with cords and took him up out of the dungeon, and Jeremiah remained in the court of the prison. And then verse 23, so shall they bring out all thy wives and thy children to the Chaldeans, and thou shalt not escape out of their hand, but shalt be taken by the hand of the king of Babylon, and thou shalt cause this city to be burned with fire. And verse 24, then said Zedekiah unto Jeremiah, let no man know of these words, and thou shalt not die. Verse 27, then came all the princes unto Jeremiah and asked him, and he told them according to all these words that the king had commanded, so that they left off speaking with him, for the matter was not perceived. So Jeremiah abode in the court of the prison until the day that Jerusalem was taken, and he was there when Jerusalem was taken. He was in the prison when Jerusalem was taken. Darby gives us this commentary on covering chapters 39 all the way through 44. He says, after this, chapter 39 and the following chapters give us the history of the confusion and iniquity that reigned among the remnant who were not carried captive to Babylon, in order that they should be scattered and that all should fully bear the judgment which God had pronounced. Nevertheless, if at this last hour this remnant had submitted to the yoke of Nebuchadnezzar, peace should have reigned in the land, and these few that remained should have possessed it. But some revolt, and others fear the consequences of their folly. There is no idea of trusting in Jehovah. They consult Jeremiah, but refuse to obey the word of the Lord from his mouth. They take refuge in Egypt to escape Nebuchadnezzar, but only to fall under the sword which would have spared them in Judea, had they remained there in subjection to the king. In Egypt they give themselves up to idolatry, that the wrath of God might come upon them to the end. Nevertheless, God would spare even a little remnant of these, but Pharaoh Hophra, in whom they trusted, should be given up into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, as Zedekiah had been. Chapter 39 from Halley's, it says this is told also in chapter 52 and in 2 Kings 25, where see the note, and in 2 Chronicles 36, Nebuchadnezzar, knowing of Jeremiah's lifelong admonition to Jerusalem to submit to him, now offered to confer on Jeremiah any honor he would accept, even a worthy place in the Babylonian court. King of Babylon offered this to Jeremiah because he recognized, here we have a great man of God, although he didn't recognize his God. Jeremiah 39:1, he says, in the 9th year of Zedekiah the king of Judah, in the 10th month came Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon and all his army against Jerusalem and besieged it. Okay, now we're really seeing the siege on Jerusalem. Verse 2, and in the 11th year of Zedekiah, the 4th month, the 9th day of the month, the city was broken up. Verse 6, then the king of Babylon slew the sons of Zedekiah in Riblah before his eyes. Also the king of Babylon slew all the nobles of Judah. Verse 7, moreover, he put out Zedekiah's eyes and bound him with chains to carry him to Babylon. So you see, it wasn't easy, even though he was taken care of. His eyes were put out. Verse number 8, and the Chaldeans burned the king's house and the houses of the people with fire and break down the walls of Jerusalem. Verse 9, then Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried away captive into Babylon the remnant of the people that remained in the city, and those that fell away that fell to him with the rest of the people that remained. And even, verse 14, even they sent and took Jeremiah out of the court of the prison and committed him unto Gedaliah, the son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, that he should carry him home. So he dwelt among the people. And verse 17, but I will deliver thee in that day, saith the Lord, and thou shalt not be given unto the hand of the men of whom thou art afraid. Verse 18, for I will surely deliver thee, and thou shalt not fall by the sword, but thy life shall be a prey unto thee, because thou hast put thy trust in me. You notice that was prophesied just shortly before here. And we go to verse 40, Gedaliah was made the governor over Judah. And verse number 2, it says, and the captain of the guard took Jeremiah and said unto him, the Lord thy God hath pronounced this evil upon this place. Verse 5, now while he was not yet gone back, he said, go back to Gedaliah, the son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, whom the king of Babylon hath made governor over the cities of Judah, and dwell with him among the people, or go wheresoever it seemeth convenient unto thee to go. So the captain of the guard gave him victuals and a reward, and let him go. Gedaliah says, give him some food and some money or clothing or something, let him get out of here. Verse 6 says, then went Jeremiah to Gedaliah, the son of Ahikam, to Mizpah, and dwelt with him among the people that were left in the land. Chapter 41, Gedaliah was assassinated. And it says, the remnant prepares to go to Egypt because of the fear of the Chaldeans. See, they didn't want to give up. They're still afraid. Verse 2, Jeremiah 41, verse 2, then arose Ishmael the son of Nethaniah, and the 10 men that were with him, and smote Gedaliah the son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, with the sword, and slew him, whom the king of Babylon had made governor over the land. Made it about 6 months, and they killed him. And chapter 41, verse 16, then took Johanan the son of Kareah, and all the captains of the forces that were with him, all the remnant of the people whom he had recovered from Ishmael the son of Nethaniah from Mizpah. After that he had slain Gedaliah the son of Ahikam, even mighty men of war, and the women, and the children, and the eunuchs, which he had brought again from Gibeon. Verse 17, and they departed, dwelt in the habitation of Chimham, which is by Bethlehem, to enter into Egypt. Verse 18, because of the Chaldeans, for they were afraid of them, because Ishmael the son of Nethaniah had slain Gedaliah the son of Ahikam, whom the king of Babylon made governor in the land. And 42, just a short ways to go here, and we'll stop. It says, the remnant, fearing reprisal by Nebuchadnezzar for the slaying of Gedaliah, fled to Egypt, who explicitly warned of God that that would mean extinction. And they took Jeremiah along. So I'm going to stop right there, leave you hanging. We made it to chapter 42.
No!
Next week is a little bit shorter reading assignment. We're going to finish the book of Jeremiah, and we are also going to do the book of Lamentations, because it's very short, 5 chapters. Okay, so finish your reading from chapter 46 through 52. You get those 6 chapters, and the entire book of Lamentations, all 5 chapters there. So you only have 11 chapters to read. A lot of them are very short. Okay, and we will take up right there where we left off at chapter 42.
Short for you.